energy, the last things, which promises a final, decisive divine intervention to judge and dismantle the chaotic and unjust systems of this world, and establish a new heaven and a new earth, characterized by perfect divine order and righteousness. 41. The individual's experience of an unmanageable time is thus a microcosm of this redemptive history. It is a personal descent into chaos that, when met with faith, becomes the stage for a personal act of divine recreation. This is powerfully illustrated in the story of Joseph and his brothers. From the human perspective, their act of selling him into slavery was a malicious deed that created years of suffering and chaos. Yet from the divine perspective, as Joseph later reveals, it was a necessary part of a larger providential plan. "You meant it for evil," he tells them, "but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive." General 50:20.43 This principle of unintended consequences, governed by divine providence, shows how God's sovereign plan is not thwarted by humanly caused chaos but works through it, leaving even the most unmanageable events into his ultimate good purpose. 43. The unmanageable time is therefore the point at which the metaphysical deficiency of temporality, the constant loss and incompleteness described by philosophers, becomes an acute psychological and spiritual crisis. The general, background truth about contingency becomes an unbearable, all-round reality. The widower's grief is the raw experience of the truth that the past is lost. 9. The addict's powerlessness is the raw experience of the truth that the future is not within one's control. 37 This moment of terrible clarity, where the veneer of self-sufficiency is stripped away, is profoundly significant. It reveals the inherent fragility of a life lived solely within the confines of temporal reality and forces a confrontation with the need for something more, a reality that is not fleeting, incomplete, or subject to loss. The unmanageable time creates an existential vacuum that only a being who is timeless, all-possessing, and sovereign can fill. Section 5. The Mind of God and the Mind of Man. To fully grasp how an unmanageable human crisis is situated within the divine reality, it is necessary to bridge the conceptual chasm between the human mind and the mind of God. This requires addressing the philosophical challenges to the idea of a timeless consciousness and articulating how such a being can know, will, and act in relation to a changing, temporal world. The problem of a temporal consciousness. One of the most potent objections to the doctrine of divine timelessness is that a timeless being cannot be personal or conscious in any meaningful sense. 12 Human consciousness is fundamentally temporal. It involves a sequence of thoughts, the faculty of memory accessing the past, and the capacity for deliberation and anticipation projecting into the future. 15a Being devoid of this temporal structure seems less like a personal God and more like an abstract, static object, such as a mathematical principle. 15 How can a mind that does not experience succession, think, know, or love, This has led some philosophers to conclude that a timeless mind is an incoherent concept and that if God is personal, he must be temporal. 12. Reconceiving divine mind. The classical theological response to this challenge is not to impose human cognitive structures onto God, but to affirm that the divine mind is qualitatively and fundamentally different from ours. 8. The solution lies in key doctrines such as divine simplicity and the nature of divine knowledge. Filled circle. Divine simplicity. The doctrine of divine simplicity states that God is not composed of parts, divisions, or unrealized potential. 2. He is a single, unified, and pure actuality. This means his mind is not a composite of different thoughts succeeding one another in time. His knowledge is not something he has or acquires. Rather, God's being is a perfect and eternal act of knowing. His essence and his intellect are one and the same. 11. Filled circle. Knowledge as vision, not process. Consequently, God's knowledge is not discursive, arrived at through a step-by-step process of reasoning, but is intuitive and immediate. 45. Theologians often employ analogies to help grasp this concept. Charles Hodge compares it to our ability to view a passing pageant, taking in the whole scene and the succession of its parts in a single, comprehensive view. 10. Catherine Rogers uses the analogy of human memory, where a whole sequence of past events can be brought to mind in a single, present mental act. 4. God's consciousness is an eternal, direct, and complete apprehension of all of reality, in its entirety and in all its temporal relations, at once. Divine consciousness as the ground of being. Some mystical and philosophical traditions take this concept even further, proposing that divine consciousness is not just a mind that knows reality, but is the very ground and foundation of reality itself. 46. In this view, existence and consciousness are ultimately one. The physical world of matter and time is a projection or manifestation of this underlying consciousness. Human consciousness is a localized and filtered participation in this universal divine consciousness, a participation that is trapped by the mind's activity into perceiving reality through the limiting lens of linear time. 46. To transcend the mind's chatter through practices like meditation is to momentarily touch this timeless, underlying reality, the pure presence of oneself, which is an echo of the divine. I am. 46. Our timeless God ACTs in a temporal world. This leads to the final, crucial question: how can a changeless, timeless God perform different actions at different moments in time, such as creating the world, answering a prayer, or bringing about the incarnation? The classical answer maintains a strict distinction between God's single act of will and its multiple effects in time. 4. God's volition is one, eternal, and unchanging. In this single act, he timelessly wills the entire causal nexus of creation to unfold. He wills that event A should occur at time t1, that event B should occur at time t2, and that event C should occur at time t3. The divine act is one, but its effects are successive and distributed throughout the temporal order he created. The incarnation of Christ provides the most profound and mysterious case study of this interaction. In this event, the eternal Son of God takes on a complete human nature, entering fully into the stream of temporal existence. 6 This act, while introducing immense theological complexities regarding divine simplicity, demonstrates that the timeless divine reality is capable of uniting itself with the temporal without being subsumed or diminished by it. It serves as the ultimate bridge between the eternal and the temporal. This framework has direct implications for understanding the unmanageable time. From the human perspective, the experience is a sequence. A series of poor choices leads to a crisis. In the depths of a crisis, one cries out to God. Following this prayer, one experiences grace and rescue. It feels as though God is reacting to the prayer in time. However, from the temporal divine perspective, the entire sequence is part of a single, eternally willed and known reality. God's answer to the prayer does not follow the prayer in divine time. Rather, the free choices, the resulting crisis, the cry for help, the prayer itself, and the provision of grace are all co-present within God's eternal vision. They are willed as a single, interconnected, providential whole. This preserves both God's immutable sovereignty, he does not change his mind in response to the prayer, and the genuine efficacy of human action. The prayer is a real and necessary cause of the outcome within the temporal order. The unmanageable moment is the divinely foreseen and ordained catalyst that prompts the free act of surrender, which in turn is the divinely ordained means for receiving the grace that was eternally willed for that person. God does not react to the crisis. His eternal act constitutes both the crisis and its resolution. Part 3. Synthesis and implications. This final part of the report synthesizes the preceding metaphysical and existential analyses to provide a direct, multi-layered answer to the user's query. By integrating the concepts of divine eternity, omniscience, omnipotence, and human crisis, a coherent and profound picture emerges of how an unmanageable time is situated within the eternal mind of God. Section 6. An unmanageable time in the eternal now. The user's query, what is an unmanageable time in life's experience of the future mind of God as now, is a dense, poetic, and philosophically rich question. To answer it adequately requires deconstructing its component parts and reassembling them within the theological framework that has been established. An unmanageable time in life's experience. This phrase points to a specific and visceral human reality. As analyzed in Part 2, this is the moment of existential crisis where the individual's capacity for control is overwhelmed and their illusion of self-sufficient autonomy is shattered. 35 It is the acute, painful realization of the fundamental contingency and powerlessness that undergirds all temporal existence. 9 It represents a state of personal chaos where an individual's plans, choices, and efforts have resulted in a situation they cannot fix, a future they cannot secure, and consequences they cannot manage or reverse. Point 38 is the moment of hitting rock bottom, the point of ultimate vulnerability where the human will is exhausted and broken. Of the future. From the limited, linear perspective of human consciousness, this crisis is almost always oriented toward the future. It manifests as a profound anxiety about what is to come, a dread that past mistakes have irrevocably damaged future possibilities, or a paralysis born from the inability to see a viable path forward. The unmanageability is precisely the perceived destruction of a desired future and the inability to construct a new one. The future, which is normally a realm of hope and planning, becomes a source of terror or a void. Mind of God. As established in Section 5, this is not a mind that functions like a human's. It is not a stream of consciousness but the simple, eternal, and perfect act of divine knowing that is identical with the divine being itself. Point 10 It is the timeless, immutable, and all-encompassing consciousness that is the ground of all reality and the source of all truth. Point 46 As now. This final, crucial phrase invokes the concept of the eternal now.